My mother wept at my funeral. She stood at the front of the room in a black dress she had ordered 3 days after I went missing, dabbing her eyes with a folded tissue while 43 people who loved me sat in wooden chairs and mourned a woman who was still breathing 62 miles away. I know the dress was ordered 3 days after I went missing because I found the receipt later. In her email. In a folder she had labeled arrangements. Not search. Not find Seraphina. Not bring my daughter home. Arrangements. I was 29 years old. I had a job I had worked 12-hour days to build, an apartment I paid for entirely on my own, and a trust fund my grandmother had left me with one specific instruction. She had pressed my hand between both of hers in her final weeks, looked me directly in the eye and said, "This is yours, baby. Don't you let anyone take it." I didn't know then that the people she was warning me about were sitting at the same table as us during Sunday dinners. Here is what happened while I was unconscious in a hospital ward listed under the wrong name, too disoriented to correct anyone, too injured to reach a phone. My brother Emmett called the insurance company on day 9 of my disappearance. Not to report me missing. Not to ask whether a claim could be paused. He called to ask how long someone needed to be gone before a presumed death declaration could be filed. My cousin Pearl drafted the paperwork. She had worked at an insurance brokerage for 2 years in her 20s and she still remembered exactly how these things moved. My mother Lydia signed everything. The payout was $214,000. And my grandmother's trust, $50,000 she had spent 30 years saving and placed specifically in my name, they tried to empty that too. 41 times. I know because the denial notifications were sitting in my email when I finally got access to a borrowed phone on the morning I was discharged. 41 attempts. Every single one blocked. Every single one denied. Because 6 weeks before the accident that took me off the road and out of my family's sight, I had made one quiet decision that saved everything. I transferred the trust to a licensed fiduciary firm and removed every family member's access to a single dollar. I did it because something felt wrong. I did it because my grandmother taught me to listen to that feeling. And I did it because in my profession, estate planning, the people who survive the worst outcomes are never the ones who panicked loudest. They are always the ones who prepared in the silence before the storm. My family told everyone I was dead. They planned a service. They placed flowers. They cashed the check. What they couldn't plan for was the Thursday afternoon when the insurance company scheduled a final disbursement meeting, and I walked through the door. My name is Seraphina Mills. And this is what happened. I want to take you back to a kitchen. It is a Tuesday evening in late October. I am 13 years old and sitting at the dining table of our house in Savannah, Georgia, with a stack of insurance documents spread in front of me that no 13-year-old should understand. But I understood them. Because my father Clyde had lost his job 4 months earlier and the bills had quietly multiplied, and my mother Lydia had looked at the paperwork, set it on the table, and walked back to the sink without a word. No one asked me to sit down and go through them. I just did. That was the beginning of a pattern I would spend the next 16 years mistaking for love. My name in our family had 2 meanings. To my grandmother Gundred, it meant the one I trust. To everyone else, it meant the one who handles things. There were 4 of us in that house. My mother Lydia, my father Clyde, my brother Emmett, and me. We were not a wealthy family and we were not a poor one. We were the particular kind of family where money was never discussed openly but always felt. In the tension before the end of the month, in the careful way my mother watched prices at the grocery store, in the specific silence that fell over dinner whenever the subject of the future came up. Emmett was 3 years younger than me and had the particular gift some people are born with, the gift of needing things without appearing to ask for them. He didn't demand. He simply existed in a state of perpetual emergency, and the family organized itself around resolving his latest crisis the way water organizes itself around a stone. Naturally. Without discussion. When Emmett failed his sophomore year, the family rallied. Dad took him fishing for a week. Mom made his favorite meals and told him that grades didn't define a person. When I made the honor roll the same semester, my mother's response at dinner was 4 words. She nodded once and said, "Good. Keep it up." Kept it up. I kept it up through high school, through a full academic scholarship to the University of Georgia, through a graduate program in estate planning that my mother described to her friends as some kind of lawyer thing Seraphina does. My cousin Pearl Finch came into the picture more heavily during my college years. Pearl was Lydia's niece from her sister's side. Charming in the specific way that people who have never been held accountable tend to be charming. She laughed easily, remembered birthdays, and had a talent for appearing at exactly the moment when something valuable was being decided. She had worked at an insurance brokerage in her mid-20s. She left after 2 years under circumstances no one in the family discussed directly, but which I had always quietly filed under watch this. My first real job after graduate school paid me well. Not extravagantly but well. Enough to start building the kind of financial foundation I had always wanted. Enough to finally stop calculating before every grocery run. The requests from my family began arriving approximately 6 weeks after my first paycheck. Emmett needed first and last month's rent for an apartment he had found. Just a bridge, he said. Just until he got settled. I sent the money. He thanked me once by text, and then the subject closed the way a door closes in a house where no one discusses the rooms. 3 months later, Dad's truck needed a repair that the family couldn't cover that month. I sent what was needed. Mom called to thank me, and in the same sentence mentioned that the electricity bill had been higher than expected. I sent that too. By the end of my second year working, I had given my family slightly over $14,000. I had never once been asked how I was doing financially. Not once. The pattern had a rhythm to it. A request would arrive, never as a demand, always as an emergency, always framed with the specific language of temporary and just this once. I would respond. The crisis would resolve. And the next one would arrive on schedule like mail. What I did not understand then, and only began to understand in my late 20s, was that the role I played in my family had nothing to do with love. Love is mutual. Love notices when the person giving has given too much. Love asks back. What my family offered me was not love. It was utility. I was useful, and usefulness in that house was the closest thing to being valued that any of us ever learned. The person who saw this most clearly was my grandmother Seraphina Mills. She was my father's mother, and she was the singular exception to everything I have just described. She was a small woman with large hands and the specific kind of quiet that belongs to people who have been watching the world carefully for a very long time. When I was 17, she called me into her bedroom on a Sunday afternoon and pressed an envelope into my hand. Inside was a letter and a number, the beginning of a savings account she had been building for years, designated entirely for me. "This is yours," she said. "I am putting it in writing and I am telling you now so no one can pretend they didn't know. This money is for your life, for your education, for your future, not for anyone else's emergencies." She held my hand for a moment. "You hear me, Seraphina? Not for anyone else." I heard her. I just didn't yet know who she was warning me about. Gundred died when I was 25. Lung cancer, swift and merciless, 11 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. She left behind a trust of $50,000. Accumulated over 3 decades of disciplined saving. The trust documents named one person as trustee. Me. I remember the reading of the documents in the attorney's office. I remember my mother's expression when my name was announced. It was not grief. It was something more precise than grief. It was recalculation. She said nothing that day. But 3 weeks later, she mentioned over the phone that it might be simpler if the trust were managed as a family. More accessible. Easier for everyone. I said I would think about it. I didn't think about it. I filed the comment in the back of my mind under watch this, right beside Pearl's departure from the insurance brokerage, and I went back to work. For the next 4 years, I managed the trust exactly as Gundred had instructed. Education and medical expenses only for me. No exceptions. Emmett asked once, not directly but through my mother, which was how he always moved when he wanted something significant, whether the trust could cover a business idea he had seen someone running online. I said no. The trust terms were clear. Emmett didn't speak to me for 6 weeks after that. My mother called to say I was being rigid. I went back to work. By the year I turned 29, I had given my family a combined total of $61,000 over 6 years. I had the bank records to prove every transfer. I kept them not out of resentment but out of professional habit. I worked in estate planning, and in my world, documentation was not suspicious. Documentation was survival. I did not yet know how right I was. The last conversation I remember having with Pearl before the accident was a phone call she made in early September, framed as catching up. Pearl always framed things as something warmer than they were. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing in particular. Her new apartment, a trip she was considering, the family get-together that Lydia was apparently planning for Thanksgiving. And then, near the end of the call, the question shifted. "Hey, random question," Pearl said, in the tone she used when questions were not random at all. "If a trustee was unavailable for some reason, couldn't be reached, what would happen to the trust? Would the funds just sit there? Or is there some process to access them?" I answered calmly and professionally. Gave her the textbook answer. Told her it depended on the trust structure. Then I said goodbye, ended the call, and sat for a long time at my kitchen table in the quiet apartment. Something had shifted in that conversation. Not visibly, not dramatically, but the way the air shifts before rain, when the pressure changes before the first cloud arrives. I opened my laptop that evening and began reviewing Gundred's trust documents. There is a specific kind of fear that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with racing thoughts or a tight chest. It arrives as clarity, a slow, cold, precise understanding that something you trusted has been quietly compromised. It is the fear that professionals in risk-adjacent fields recognize immediately, because in our work, it is always the quiet signals that precede the largest losses. I felt that fear the morning after Pearl's phone call. I sat at my desk with Gundred's trust documents open in front of me, and I read them not as her granddaughter but as an estate planner. Professionally. Methodically. Without sentiment. What I found was a structure that was solid in its legal terms but vulnerable in one specific way. As sole trustee, I was the only authorized party. But if I were, as Pearl had casually phrased it, unavailable for any reason, the trust would enter a legal gray period. A period during which a motivated family member, with the right professional knowledge and a persuasive enough argument, might be able to petition for emergency access. Pearl had the professional knowledge. My family had the motivation. And I had $61,000 worth of evidence that they were not opposed to framing requests as emergencies. I called Ralph Conway the following morning. Ralph was my estate attorney, a measured, careful man whose office smelled like old books and whose opinions I trusted entirely. I explained what I wanted and he confirmed it was possible. 2 steps. Step 1. Transfer trustee authority of Gundred's Trust to Doolin and Brock Fiduciary Services, a licensed independent firm with no family connection. No emotional leverage would work on them. No tears, no emergencies, no framing. Only written authorization from me would move a single dollar. Step 2. Update my life insurance beneficiary. For 3 years, the primary beneficiary on my policy had been Lydia Mills, my mother. I changed it to a charitable foundation. I also added a specific condition to the policy. Any death claim would require a verified death certificate from a licensed medical examiner. A presumed death declaration alone would not be sufficient for disbursement. Ralph looked at me over his glasses when I finished explaining and said simply, "You've thought about this carefully." "It's my job," I said. He nodded and prepared the paperwork. I signed everything on a Wednesday afternoon in early October, 6 weeks before the accident. I shook Ralph's hand, walked out into an afternoon that was warm and golden and completely ordinary, and drove to the cemetery where Gundred was buried. I stood at her grave for a long time. The grass was still green, which surprised me for October. A cardinal landed on the headstone and stayed there for a moment before lifting off again. "I protected it, Grandma," I said quietly, "the way you always said I would." I drove home and made dinner and went to bed early. I did not tell Emmett. I did not tell my mother. I did not tell Pearl. The decision was mine. It lived inside me quietly, the way the most important decisions always do. Not with fanfare, but with the settled feeling of something finally placed where it belongs. The morning of the accident was a Tuesday in mid-November. I packed a light bag for a 2-day work trip to Augusta. Site visit for a client whose estate documents needed in-person review. I made coffee, fed the plant on my kitchen windowsill, locked my front door. My phone buzzed as I reached the car. A text from Emmett. "Hey, have you thought any more about that loan we talked about?" I read it once. I did not reply. I put the phone in my bag and started the engine. I did not know that was the last ordinary moment I would have for 8 months. The road to Augusta runs east through long stretches of pine and red clay. I have driven it 100 times. The rain started about 40 minutes out, Not heavy, just enough to make the road slick and the curves demand attention. I was careful. I was always careful. The other driver was not. A pickup truck crossed the center line on a blind curve at a speed that left no room for correction. I remember the sound. A sound too large and sudden for the mind to process in real time. I remember the airbag. I remember light. Then the specific gray of a sky glimpse through a cracked windshield. Then nothing. When I woke up, I was in a room I did not recognize, with a name on the board above the bed that was not mine. The name on the board said Sarah Haskins. I stared at it for a long time before I understood that I was the person in the bed beneath it. The nurse who came in when my monitors shifted explained it gently. My bag had been lost in the wreck. No identification. No phone. No way to confirm who I was. The intake team at Mercy Ridge Medical Center had registered me under a partial name pieced together from a loyalty card found in my jacket pocket. A coffee shop card belonging to a coworker I had borrowed a jacket from the week before. Sarah Haskins. Not Seraphina Mills. I had a fractured collarbone, 2 cracked ribs, and a concussion severe enough that the first 2 weeks of my stay exist in my memory as fragments. Ceiling tiles, the sound of monitors, voices at the edge of comprehension. I could not hold a sustained thought long enough to correct anyone. By the time the fog began to lift, I had been Sarah Haskins in the Mercy Ridge system for nearly 3 weeks. I asked for a phone on day 22. The nurses gave me access to a ward phone for 15 minutes. I dialed my mother's number. It rang 8 times and went to voicemail. I left a message, slow, careful, my voice still rough from the breathing tube, telling her where I was and asking her to call the hospital. No one called back. I told myself the message must not have reached her clearly. I told myself I had probably dialed incorrectly. My hands were still unsteady. The concussion had scrambled small things, numbers, sequences. I tried again 3 days later. This time my brother's number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I left another message. No one called back. What I did not know, and would only learn months later through documents and phone records, was what had been happening in Savannah during those weeks. Emmett had called my phone repeatedly for the first 2 days after the accident. This I believe was genuine concern, not because I think Emmett is incapable of love, but because the calls stopped on day 3, before anything had been arranged, which tells me the concern arrived and then was redirected. My mother filed a missing persons report on day 4. The same afternoon, she called an insurance agent named Harlan Voss and asked him a question she framed as hypothetical. How long did a person need to be missing before a death could be presumed? How would the process work? What documents would be required? Harlan Voss, to his credit, gave her only general information and noted the call in his records. Pearl was less cautious. Pearl, with her 2 years of brokerage experience and her specific knowledge of presumed death claim processes, began drafting paperwork on day 7. Not for submission, not yet. But she had the framework ready. She had researched the minimum absence period required in Georgia for a presumed death declaration. She knew the thresholds. She knew the language. She wrote it out in a document she saved on her personal laptop under the title Family Administrative Notes. I found this document later. Ralph obtained it through the legal process. I read it once. The date at the top was 7 days after my car left the road. 7 days. On day 26 of my disappearance, a nurse at Mercy Ridge named Maybelle Cross made a call to the Mills family home. She was cross-referencing unidentified patients with open missing persons reports in the region. She had a description: female, late 20s, dark hair, minor identifying scar on the left wrist from a childhood accident. She called the number listed on the missing persons report. Emmett answered. The nurse described the patient in the ward. She gave the approximate age, the general physical description, the circumstances of the accident. Emmett said, "That doesn't match anyone from our family." He thanked her politely and ended the call. He did not tell Lydia. He did not update the missing persons report. He did not call the hospital back to ask for more information. 2 days later, he signed his name on the insurance claim paperwork that Pearl had finished drafting. The claim was filed on day 29 of my disappearance. The missing persons report was closed by county process due to lack of follow-up from the repper. The discharge paperwork listed my real name for the first time. A nurse had finally made the connection 3 weeks earlier. A physical therapist who grew up in Savannah recognized something in my face, asked the right question, and within an hour the records were being corrected. The missing persons report, already closed, was reopened briefly and then resolved. The hospital notified the county. The county notified no one in my family directly, because by then my family had stopped being listed as active contacts on any search. I signed my name on the release form and walked out into a morning that smelled like cut grass and recent rain. Someone had left a paper coffee cup on the concrete barrier near the parking lot entrance. It was still standing upright, abandoned but intact. I stopped and looked at it for a moment in a way that probably seemed strange to anyone watching. A woman in hospital discharge clothes standing very still in a parking lot, looking at a paper cup. I was not looking at the cup. I was looking at the ordinary world. The world that had continued without me for 8 months while my family buried me in paperwork and moved on. A passing nurse offered me a phone. I sat on the concrete barrier beside the abandoned cup and opened my email. The first thing I saw was Ralph Conway's name. 2 messages marked important, please respond, sent at 2-week intervals and then stopped, presumably when he too assumed I was unreachable. Below that, beginning 6 weeks into my disappearance, were the trust denial notifications. I scrolled through them slowly. Each one was formatted identically, the name of the requesting party, the date, the amount requested, the reason for denial. The requesting party on every single notification was the same name, Emmett Mills. The amounts varied slightly but never exceeded $990. The pattern was deliberate, someone who understood financial alert thresholds and was trying to stay beneath them. Someone who had thought about this. Someone who had planned. I read all 41. I did not cry. My hands were very still on the borrowed phone. The morning light was doing something golden across the parking lot, and a bird was making noise somewhere in the trees at the edge of the property, and I sat there reading my brother's name 41 times in a row. Then I called Ralph Conway. He answered on the second ring. Seraphina. His voice carried the particular weight of a man who had been preparing for a conversation. He didn't know how to begin. I've been trying to reach you for months. I know, I said. Tell me everything. He told me everything. The insurance claim. The death declaration. The payout divided. The withdrawal attempts against the trust. 41 all denied. The fiduciary firm holding exactly as instructed. He told me that the insurance company had scheduled a final disbursement meeting for a remaining supplemental balance. A routine verification, they believed. Scheduled for the following Thursday. When he finished, I was quiet for a moment. Is the trust completely intact? I asked. He checked his records. Every dollar, he said. 50,000 untouched. I exhaled. Long and slow. A breath I felt like I had been holding for 8 months. Ralph, I said. I need a meeting. Today if possible. And I need you to not tell anyone I called. I'll clear my afternoon, he said simply. After the call, I sat for another few minutes on the concrete barrier. I thought about calling my mother. The impulse arrived and I examined it carefully. The old reflex, the lifelong habit of reaching toward my family even when the reaching had cost me everything. I set the impulse down. Then I called Winnie Turlow. Winnie was a woman I had known since childhood. A former neighbor who had no stake in anything, no claim on anyone, no agenda beyond genuine human decency. She was the kind of person who existed in a family's orbit without ever being absorbed by it. She answered on the second ring. Hello. Winnie, I said. It's Seraphina. For seconds of complete silence. Then, oh my lord. Her voice fractured. Seraphina. Honey. Where are you? I told her I was safe. I told her briefly what had happened, the hospital, the name error, the months of recovery. And then I asked her what had happened at home. She told me about the memorial service. Flowers. Candles. 43 people in wooden chairs. Pearl organizing the program with the specific efficiency she applied to everything she arranged. Emmett delivering a eulogy that Winnie described quietly as beautiful, actually. And my mother, Lydia, in a black dress, holding a tissue she pressed to her eyes at carefully spaced intervals. They used a photograph of you, Winnie said. The one from your cousin Lyra's graduation. The one where you're laughing. I closed my eyes. They had used my happiest photograph to bury me. The one where I looked most fully, completely alive. They had placed it on a display table in a room full of people who loved me, surrounded it with white roses, and built a story around it while cashing a check with my name on it. "Winnie," I said when I could speak again, "I'm going to need you to send me whatever you have from that service. Any photos, any recordings, anything. I have a video someone took on their phone," she said quietly. "I'll send it tonight." "Thank you." "Seraphina." Her voice steadied. "What are you going to do?" I looked across the parking lot. The paper coffee cup was still standing on the barrier in the morning light. "I'm going to a meeting," I said. Ralph Conway's office was exactly as I remembered it. Amber desk lamp. Bookshelves floor to ceiling. The particular smell of rooms where serious things have been decided for a long time. He stood when I walked in, which was not his habit, and he looked at me for a moment the way people look at someone they were not certain they would see again. He did not comment on how I looked. He simply gestured to the chair across from his desk and said, "Sit down. Let's go through everything." I placed a borrowed notepad on his desk. 12 pages of notes I had made in the car on the way over dates, amounts, sequences, questions. He read through them without interrupting. When he finished, he set the notepad down and folded his hands. "You have more than enough," he said. We spent the next 3 hours going through the case layer by layer. The insurance fraud was the most significant issue. Filing a presumed death declaration while a missing persons report was still technically active, without a recovered body or a verified death certificate, and then receiving and dividing the payout, that was not a gray area. Particularly given the timeline. Day 9 of my disappearance, my mother had called Harlan Voss with questions she framed as hypothetical. Day 26, Emmett had received the nurse's call from Mercy Ridge, and said I didn't sound like anyone from their family. Day 29 the claim was filed. That sequence, Ralph explained, would be very difficult to present as grief rather than planning. The trust withdrawal attempts added a separate dimension. 41 structured attempts to access a frozen account, each deliberately kept beneath financial alert thresholds. That pattern had a name in financial law, and the name was not accidental. Pearl's role was documented through the claim paperwork itself. Her formatting, her language, her structural knowledge of the process. Ralph had already had it reviewed by a colleague with brokerage experience who confirmed that the document bore the hallmarks of someone who understood insurance claim mechanics professionally. And then there was Emmett's phone call with the Mercy Ridge nurse. The hospital had a record of the outgoing call. The call log from the Mills family home, which Ralph's contacts at the county had helped obtain through the reopened missing persons report, showed an incoming call from Mercy Ridge on day 26, answered by a phone registered to Emmett Mills, lasting 3 minutes and 40 seconds. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Long enough to hear a description. Long enough to ask a clarifying question. Long enough to make a decision. Ralph slid a legal pad across the desk and I began building the folder. Tab 1. The 41 trust denial records. Emmett's name on every page. Dates, amounts, the unmistakable pattern. Tab 2. The insurance claim timeline. File day 29. Missing persons report closed day 38. The 9-day window when I was technically still an open missing persons case and the claim had already been submitted. Printed. Highlighted. Tab 3. The nurse's call record from Mercy Ridge. Call duration, date, the answer log. Tab 4. Pearl Finch's brokerage employment history, dated, cross-referenced against the claim drafting timeline, and the document formatting analysis. Tab 5. My 6-year financial contribution record. $61,000 in transfers to family members, documented by bank records. Context. History. Pattern. In the sealed envelope at the back of the folder, I placed a USB drive. On it was the video Winnie had sent, Emmett's eulogy from my memorial service. I had watched it once alone, in Ralph's parking lot before coming inside. Emmett's voice on that recording was soft and warm and sorrowful in a way that made my chest feel like it had been pressed between 2 flat stones. He talked about how I had always been the steady one. How the family leaned on me. How losing me had taken something from the family that could never be replaced. He said all of that approximately 11 days after signing paperwork to collect $214,000 from my death. The video did not need commentary. Ralph also informed me of something that shifted the entire shape of Thursday. My insurance policy update, the one requiring a verified death certificate rather than a presumed death declaration, had been flagged during the claims review process. The insurance company's internal compliance team had noted the discrepancy between the policy's stated requirement and the documentation submitted. They had approved the first disbursement before the flag was fully reviewed, but the supplemental balance, $18,000, had been held pending a final verification meeting, a meeting to which all named parties had been invited, a meeting scheduled for Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. My mother believed the meeting was routine, a formality, a final signature before the remaining money transferred. She was correct that it was a meeting. She was incorrect about what it would verify. I spent Wednesday evening in my apartment. It was the first night back in my own space since November, and everything was exactly where I had left it. The cardigan on the desk chair, the book open on the nightstand, the plant on the kitchen windowsill. The plant had died. Completely. Brown and dry, the soil pulled away from the edges of the pot. I filled a glass with water and poured it slowly at the base anyway. Some things deserve the chance to come back. I laid out my clothes for Thursday. Gray. Clean. Simple. I placed the folder beside the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and picked up my phone and read Emmett's last text to me from the morning of the accident. "Hey, have you thought any more about that loan?" I screenshot it, added it to the folder, turned the phone face down. Then I slept. Fully. Without medication. For the first time in 8 months. Thursday arrived the way the most significant days always do. Quietly, without announcement, looking exactly like any other morning. I made coffee. I watered the plant, which had not yet shown any sign of recovery but which I had decided to believe in anyway. I picked up the folder from beside the door, checked its contents once, and walked to my car. The drive downtown took 22 minutes. I parked in the structure across from Brock and Richmond Financial Services and sat for a moment with the engine off and my hands resting in my lap. I was not afraid. I want to be precise about that because fear and gravity are different things. What I felt was gravity, the specific weight of a moment you have been moving toward without knowing it, a moment that has your name on it, a moment that has been waiting with the patience of something that understands it will not be skipped. I got out of the car and walked toward the building. The lobby was marble and clean light. An elevator that smelled faintly of lemon polish. A hallway on the 4th floor where my heels made a sound against the tile that was steady and unhurried. The conference room was glass-walled, visible from the hallway. I saw them before they saw me. My mother Lydia was seated at the far end of the table in a dark blazer, her posture straight, her hands folded, her chin at the particular angle that meant she had prepared herself for a role and intended to play it well. She looked composed. She looked like a woman managing grief with dignity. She had practiced this. Emmett was beside her, leaning slightly back in his chair, his expression relaxed. He had dressed carefully, a pressed collared shirt, his good watch. He looked like a man for whom the difficult part was already behind him. Pearl sat on Emmett's other side with a leather portfolio in front of her. Closed, professional. She was the most composed of the three. Pearl was always most composed when she believed the machinery she had built was running correctly. A representative from the insurance company named Rufus McGraw sat at the head of the table. A measured man in a gray suit with a folder of his own and the particular stillness of someone who processes claims for a living and has learned not to react to anything until the full picture is clear. I pushed the conference room door open and walked in. The change in the room's atmosphere happened before any of them looked up. It was the sound of my heels on the floor shifting from the hallway tile to the conference room carpet. A slight change in acoustic quality that should have meant nothing. But something in each of them responded before their eyes did. Lydia looked up first. The color left her face in a way I had never seen before and have not seen since. Not a blush or a flush or a gradual shift, but a complete and sudden departure, as though something fundamental had been withdrawn from behind her features, leaving only the surface. Emmett's chair moved. Not dramatically. Approximately 2 inches backward, a purely involuntary motion, the movement of a body reacting faster than a mind that was not prepared. Pearl looked at the folder under my arm. Her portfolio closed beneath her hand with a soft, automatic click. I walked to the chair directly across from my mother, placed the folder on the table and sat down. I did not speak immediately. I opened the folder. I looked at the first document. Then I looked up at Lydia. "Good afternoon," I said. The room did not erupt. The room compressed, the way the air compresses in a space where the structure has just fundamentally changed, and no one has yet found the language to describe it. Rufus McGraw looked between my face and the file in front of him. He reached for something in his folder, examined it, and looked at me again. "Miss Mills," he said carefully. "Seraphina Mills?" "Yes," I said. He leaned back slightly and folded his hands in the specific manner of a man who has just understood that the meeting he was conducting is not the meeting that is actually taking place. I placed the first document at the center of the table. "This is the timeline of the insurance claim filed on my behalf," I said. My voice was level, professional, the same voice I used presenting risk assessments to clients who did not want to hear the numbers. Filed on day 29 of my disappearance. The missing persons report was closed on day 38. I let the 9-day gap sit in the middle of the table like a stone. No one spoke. I placed the second document, the 41 trust denial records, fanned across the table in a row. Emmett's name on every single page. "These are withdrawal attempts made against my grandmother's trust account over a period of 6 weeks, I said, while I was listed as an unidentified patient 62 miles away. Emmett looked at his own name 41 times. I watched him do it. His jaw worked once, like he was trying to find words that had left him entirely. I placed the third document directly in front of Emmett. "This is the call record from Mercy Ridge Medical Center to this family's home telephone, made on day 26 of my disappearance. Duration: 3 minutes and 40 seconds. I paused. The nurse who made that call was attempting to identify an unidentified patient matching my description. The call was answered. The room was completely silent. "Emmett," I said. Just his name. Flat and quiet. The way you say a word when you need it to carry everything. He did not look at me. Lydia turned to him. Slowly. The movement of someone turning toward a sound they had been hoping they hadn't heard. "What is she saying?" Lydia's voice was barely above a whisper. Emmett said nothing. His hands were flat on the table, very still, the stillness of a man who has run out of room. I reached into the sealed envelope at the back of my folder and removed the USB drive. I plugged it into the small speaker the room's AV system provided for presentations. "This recording was taken at the memorial service held in my name," I said. "I have not edited or altered it. It runs 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I pressed play. Emmett's voice filled the room. Warm. Grief-soaked. Practiced. He talked about my steadiness. My reliability. The way the whole family leaned on me. He said losing me had taken something from all of them that could never be replaced. His voice broke at exactly the right moment. The specific break of a man performing sorrow he did not fully feel for an audience that would remember it. The recording ended. The silence that followed was the loudest silence I had ever been inside. I looked at Pearl. She was staring at the table's surface. Her portfolio had not moved. "Pearl," I said quietly, "your brokerage employment dates are in the folder. Your document formatting has been analyzed. Rufus has already reviewed the comparison." Pearl did not look up. Rufus McGraw quietly closed his own folder, excused himself from the table, and stepped into the hallway. Through the glass wall I watched him make 2 calls. His expression did not change during either one. Lydia finally spoke. "Seraphina." Her voice had lost the composed authority entirely. What remained was smaller. "I thought you were gone. I really did. I thought. You filed the claim on day 29, I said. You called Harlan Voss on day 4 and asked how long I needed to be missing. I kept my voice even. You did not think I was gone, Mom. You thought I might be gone, and you decided that was close enough." She lowered her head. "Emmett answered the nurse's call from Mercy Ridge on day 26, I continued. He heard a description of a patient who matched me and told her no one in the family was missing. 2 days later, he signed the claim paperwork. I looked at my brother. There is a recording of the nurse's call in this folder. There is a call log from this family's telephone. There is a 3-minute and 40-second gap that has no explanation that does not end with you making a choice. Emmett's chair moved backward again. This time he stood, which I had not expected, but he did not leave. He stood because sitting felt too exposed and leaving felt impossible, and the space between those two things had no other expression. I didn't know for certain. he said. It was the first thing he had said since I walked in. I wasn't sure it was you. 3 minutes and 40 seconds, I said. Is long enough to ask one more question. He sat back down. Rufus McGraw returned to the room. He sat. He folded his hands. Ms. Mills, he said, addressing me. The insurance company's fraud division has been notified. This meeting is being documented. A formal referral will be issued by end of business today. He paused. The supplemental disbursement will not be processed. He looked at Lydia and Emmett and Pearl with the specific neutrality of a man who has decided not to editorialize. I stood. I straightened my jacket. Picked up my folder. The $214,000 that was disbursed will need to be returned, I said. The fraud referral has already been filed. Cooperation will be noted by the relevant authorities. I looked at Pearl. The trust remains with Doolin and Brock. Permanently. No family member will ever access those funds without written authorization from me, which will not be given. I looked at Emmett. You told a nurse I didn't exist. I have thought about whether you deserve the same courtesy. I decided you do. This is your notification that you have been found. I turned toward the door. My mother's voice reached me just before I opened it. Seraphina. I stopped. I did not turn around. I should have kept looking, she said. Her voice was entirely unguarded now. No performance left in it. I should have never stopped. I stood with my hand on the door. I know, I said quietly. I did not say I forgave her. Not yet. Not in that room with the insurance documents on the table and the recording still in the air. But I did not say I didn't either. I opened the door and walked down the hallway. My heels on the tile. Steady. Unhurried. I did not look back. Friday arrived gray and mild. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee I had made in my own pot from beans I had bought with my own money, and I watched the light change on the wall while the city woke up outside my window. The folder was on the table in front of me, closed. I did not open it. I had said what needed to be said. The documents had done what documents do. They had held the truth in place when human memory would have softened it, rearranged it, allowed it to be rewritten. That was over now. What came next was different. Ralph Conway called at 9:15. The fraud division accepted the referral, he said. Emmett and Pearl are named as primary subjects. Your mother is named as a secondary party. He paused. Michael Voss, the attorney they retained last night, contacted my office this morning requesting a resolution discussion. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him the relevant referrals had been filed and that resolution discussion should be directed to the appropriate authorities. Ralph's voice carried the very faint satisfaction of a careful man who had given an answer he had been waiting to give. The trust, he confirmed, was entirely intact. $50,000 secured, every dollar accounted for, every attempted withdrawal logged and preserved. Gundred's conditions would be honored exactly as she had written them. Education and medical expenses for me. Nothing else. No exceptions. No charm offensive, no framing. No emergency would move a single cent without my written authorization. Emmett's 41 withdrawal attempts had been referred separately to the County Financial Crimes Division for review. The pattern, structured amounts below alert thresholds, consistent weekly attempts, had a legal classification, and that classification carried consequences independent of the insurance fraud case. Pearl deleted her social media accounts 48 hours after the Thursday meeting. Every profile, every post. A clean disappearance she had apparently planned in advance. A second contingency for a plan that had already failed. She had not anticipated that I had anticipated this too. Winnie Turlow had sent me screenshots of Pearl's posts the evening before the meeting. They were time-stamped, saved, and in Ralph's files by Friday morning. Pearl's digital disappearance had been photographed before it happened. 3 weeks after the meeting, a letter arrived from Emmett. Not a formal letter, handwritten, 3 pages on lined paper. His handwriting uncharacteristically careful, like someone who had drafted and redrafted before committing pen to paper. I read it once. Slowly. It was not an apology exactly. It was something more complicated, an accounting. He described in careful language the way he had experienced those 9 months. The assumption of my death that had settled over him before the facts confirmed it. The specific way grief can exist alongside calculation in a person who has learned, over a lifetime, to let urgency override everything else. He did not minimize the nurse's phone call. He addressed it directly, which I had not expected. He said he had told himself in the 3 minutes and 40 seconds of that call that the description could have fit many people, that the odds were against it being me, that the claim was already almost filed and the disruption of pulling back would have been significant. I told myself it probably wasn't you, he wrote. I should have made sure. Those 2 sentences. That was as close to honesty as Emmett had ever written me. I folded the letter. I put it in a drawer. I did not respond immediately. I might eventually, or I might not. But I kept it because some things deserve the chance to be considered, even if the verdict takes time. My mother sent flowers. No card. Just flowers, white, the same white as the ones placed at my memorial, which I do not believe was a coincidence. It was either a very deliberate gesture of acknowledgement or a very clumsy one, and with Lydia Mills it had always been difficult to know which. I put them in water on the kitchen windowsill beside the plant. The plant, which I had been watering every morning since I returned, had produced 2 small new leaves by the end of the 2nd week. Pale green, slightly tentative, the size of thumbnails. But there. Alive. Undeniably, stubbornly alive. On a Sunday afternoon 4 weeks after the meeting, I drove to the cemetery where Gundred was buried. The grass was green. The headstone was clean, which told me someone, Winnie probably, had been tending it. A cardinal was in the branches of the oak tree at the edge of the row, which I decided meant something even though I knew it probably didn't. The cardinal left the branch and lifted up into the sky in a straight, unhurried line. I stood for another moment, then turned and walked back to my car through the Sunday afternoon light. My first paycheck after returning to work felt different from every paycheck I had received for 6 years. Not because the number was different, it was the same. It felt different because of where it was going. Into an account that had no secondary purpose. No family emergency waiting to redirect it. No unspoken obligation sitting at the edge of every spending decision. For 6 years, $61,000 of what I had earned had passed through my hands and into my family's life. I had told myself this was love. I had told myself that sacrifice without acknowledgement was still a kind of dignity. I understand now that I was wrong. Not because giving is wrong, but because giving to people who view your generosity as infrastructure, as something they are entitled to access whenever they need it, is not love. It is a slow and quiet erasure. The bill that arrived from the insurance company confirming receipt of the returned funds was not satisfying in the way I expected. It was not triumphant. It was simply complete, the closing of a chapter that should never have been opened. I went to dinner alone that evening, at a restaurant I had always wanted to try and never prioritized because there had always been something more urgent, something more pressing, someone else's emergency demanding the money I might have spent on myself. I ordered what I wanted. I sat by the window. I watched the street outside and felt, for the first time in longer than I could clearly remember, the specific and uncomplicated pleasure of an evening that belonged entirely to me. I did not think about my family, not because I had hardened against them, but because I had finally learned to let the thought arrive and then let it pass without acting on it, the way you let a wave move under a boat without fighting it. My name is Seraphina Mills. I am 29 years old. My family told everyone I was dead. They planned a service. They arranged the flowers. They chose my happiest photograph and placed it on a table and built a story around it, while the insurance claim was still processing. What they never understood, what they could not have understood because they had never fully seen me, was that the woman in that photograph had been preparing for exactly this kind of storm. Not because she knew it was coming, but because she understood that the storms that destroy you are never the ones you planned for. They are always the ones you thought the people standing closest to you would warn you about. My grandmother knew better. She pressed an envelope into my 17-year-old hands and looked me in the eye and said, "This is yours, baby. Don't you let anyone take it." I kept my word, Grandma. Every dollar. Every document. Every quiet decision made in the silence before anyone knew there was anything to prepare for. They buried me on paper. I walked back in with the records. And the records, every timestamp, every denial, every 41 lines of a brother's name beside an amount he could not reach, kept me. Completely. Permanently. Mine. If this story stayed with you, let me know in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. And if you have ever been the one everyone leans on, the steady one, the reliable one, the one who handles things, I want to hear from you. What did you do when you realized the weight was more than you should have been carrying alone? Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.